Happy New Year! And you know what comes along with that? It's the dreaded New Year's resolutions. And if you feel like you've made resolutions or promises to yourself in the past, but you failed to complete those, well, then you're really going to want to listen to today's episode of the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about the income. Good morning and welcome to the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about the income. I'm David Scranton. Of course, I'm here with Sarah Samuels. And today we are talking about New Year's resolutions. And again, if you failed to achieve New Year's resolutions in the past, we're going to give you some tips and some tricks to increase your odds of doing that successfully this year. And Sarah, of course, will talk a little bit about the normal ones, people working out and
right, hitting the
loss
gym
and all
more,
that.
eating healthy, meal planning, all those normal resolutions, right,
all the
Dave?
normal stuff, right? But of course, we want to focus today on Retirement Income Source about the financial resolutions that people might make from year to year. So, so tell me, what did you make? Come on, I want to get your personal life here. What kind of resolutions did you make for 2023?
Well, of course, I always like to make the resolution of hitting the gym more, trying to get more exercise. Now, Dave goes to the gym about 3 times a day, so I know that's not on your resolution list.
Somewhat of an exaggeration.
Well, getting some exercise just because it's great for your mental health and everything. So that's one of my resolutions. Maybe take a few more vacations this year. So I'm not sure how you feel about that, Dave, but that's something on my personal resolutions list too. So what about you?
That's good. Well, it's a little bit about trying to get better work-life balance. You know, it's kind of hard. As you know, Teresa works here at the company, and then we go home, and the lines get blurred, and I want to try to really separate that and make work and try to leave it at work the best I can. So we'll see how that works out for me.
Well, that's important, and I give it up to you and Teresa. Working together and living together and being together, that's tough to navigate. So I think that's a great resolution, Dave.
Yeah. Well, let's see how it works. Like I said. So, all right. What do we have for New Year's resolutions in the financial world? Well, a big one is probably paying off debt.
Huge.
People paid off a lot of debt when the checks were given at the beginning of 2020, COVID-19, all the emergency stimulus. And then, according to reports recently, people have increased their debt again. They've gone out and they've spent money. So they've spent whatever savings was given and got into debt a little bit. And especially after the holidays, they've gotten into debt. So I think one of the first things is this resolution about paying off debt.
Yep. Especially those high interest credit cards. Those are the biggest culprit when it comes to just zapping your money if you're paying a high interest rate on your debt. But Dave, I got to ask you, are there other types of debt that maybe aren't so bad as opposed to those credit cards?
Well, it's funny, but in theory, mortgage debt is the one debt that's not so bad, because in theory, real estate appreciates. And also, depending upon how big your mortgage is and who you are, you can actually most likely deduct the interest on the mortgage. So Uncle Sam's helping you out.
Yeah.
But it's not that simple, because obviously we appeal to a lot of people who are retired or close to retirement, right? Thus the Retirement Income Source.
Right.
And all of our viewers and all of our listeners, right? So the reality here is that if you're retired, it's not just about the interest you're paying, it's about what your payments are relative to the balance. So I'll give you a simple example. I know a lot of you probably don't have $1 million mortgage, but let's say you had $1 million mortgage. It's a round number, right? And you may say, I've got a 3.5% interest rate. I locked it in when rates are low. That's awesome. But your payment might be $4,500 a month. That's $54,000 a year. Because remember, you don't just pay interest, you pay principal.
Right.
So that's 5.4% of your balance. So if you're retired, unless you're getting 5.4% in interest or dividends, not total return, in income, then it's probably a losing strategy. Even though the interest rate may seem good because it's 3.5%, the payment is not being satisfied by income. So it might make more sense even in that scenario, despite what your accountant says, to pay off that mortgage.
Yeah. Well, let's get into our Ask Dave question, because we have a question from Cindy out in Texas. Cindy says, I've heard recently there's been some changes to RMDs after Congress passed the Secure Act 2.0 and the spending bill. So what are these changes? Is everyone really required to take RMDs? And are there any exceptions to the rule? So that's sort of a 3-part question, Dave, from Cindy.
Well, of course, the RMDs are now getting a push back a little bit further. They were age 70 and a half just a couple years ago. The Secure Act the first Secure Act actually
1.0, I guess, right? In 2019.
That's right. That's right. Pushed it out to 72, and now it's getting pushed out to age 73. So only those who are 73 and over have to take required minimum distributions. And remember, just from your retirement accounts. And that does not include Roth IRAs. That's traditional IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, deferred comp plans, et cetera. So what's the exception? The big exception is if you're over that age and you are still working. Now, it doesn't apply to owners, right?
So not self-employed people if you own your own company.
That's right. So like if I'm still in the saddle 20 years from now, right, and I'm 15 years from now, gosh, I guess it's only not too, ruh-roh. And I'm still in the saddle here. Well, I still have to take RMDs from our own 401k. But if you're not the owner of the company and you're still working at age 73 or beyond, then you can avoid the RMDs, but only on the money that's in the retirement plan tied to that business. That's the one major exception that we have right there.
Yeah. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for sending in your question for Dave to answer. And if any of our other listeners out there have a question you want to hear Dave answer, all you have to do is email us at askdave@theRetirementIncomeSource. That's SOURCE.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about the income. Today, we're talking about New Year's resolutions, specifically some personal finance resolutions that you really should be making. New year, new you, right, Dave? It's time to make those positive changes.
That's right. That's right. You have to focus on it. So paying off debts are one. That we
Number
discussed,
one,
right?
very important.
Because by paying off debts, it gets you ahead of the game. You mentioned the credit cards, right?
That's right.
So
high interest credit cards.
At bare minimum, if you got into debt because of Christmas spending, right? You've got to make sure it's paid off at bare minimum by next November. You really do. Yeah. But then it gets tricky because now you have your summer vacation, and maybe some of that goes on your credit card. And then how long does it take to get that paid off? So I tell people any Christmas spending you want to get paid off easily in 6 months, so that if you do have other expenses, you do have a transmission go on your car, or you need a new refrigerator, or you want to take a vacation in the summer, and maybe it takes a few months to pay that off. Well, at least get this Christmas stuff paid off by June. Yeah. So now if you need to reload it a little bit, you can get that paid off by Christmas.
Right.
But you don't want to be paying those high interest rates for more than just a few months.
Yeah. Well, the goal, of course, is to try to not go into debt, right, during the holiday season, which I know is very difficult for a lot of people, especially a lot of people that have been recently laid off. It's a very tough time. But one of the ways you can really avoid that is having that emergency fund. And Dave, you talk about this all the time, but having that 6 months of savings saved up. So, Dave just mentioned your transmission blows on your car. That savings fund will come in handy so you don't have to go into more debt on the credit card.
That's right. That's right. And that's the other thing. Once your debts are paid off, then take the money you were putting toward that debt and put it into savings so that you're stockpiling money, and now you've got an emergency fund. Right. And even companies, corporations do. Our president and COO sent me an article over the weekend about how companies that do the best during a recession are those that manage their cash, that have a bigger cash reserve.
Yeah.
So it makes sense in corporate America, and it makes sense for individuals too. The difference is in corporate America, you have a CFO, a chief financial officer, that's in charge of that.
Yeah.
The problem is most people in your personal lives, you are the CFO.
Yep.
So you have to be really careful, and you have to be disciplined.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we're going to continue our conversation about some New Year's personal finance resolutions, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Secure Act changes and what you can expect for retirement coming up in 2023. I'm Sarah Samuels, and I'm here with our host, David Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about your income.
And welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about the income. I'm David Scranton, of course, here with Sarah Samuels. And if you're just joining us, for all of our listeners, our viewers, today we have a great show planned out for you. And we've already gotten underway as we've talked about the Secure Act 2.0, extending the age at which RMDs kick in, at least by 1 year at this point. And then also about those New Year's resolutions. And so far we've covered paying off debt and the importance of that, especially that pesky Christmas debt, right, Sarah?
That holiday debt.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, Dave, before we get into all of that and we talk about more of our tips, you mentioned listeners and viewers at the beginning. You also mentioned it a few minutes ago. So for all of our radio listeners out there who might be confused, I want to explain. We have a YouTube show. Our YouTube channel is the Retirement Income Source. You can see Dave and I do this show live. You can see some of our past interviews with really big name guests in the financial industry, people like Steve Forbes, Mohammed Al-Arian, and with our own financial advisors. that are within our retirement income source network. So I just have to get the shameless plug in there for our YouTube channel. Go check us out. And if you like what you see, give us a follow, subscribe, or like us. So Dave, let's get back into our show and for our viewers, right? So
Sure.
how do you build an emergency savings fund? I know that that's a big resolution that a lot of people should commit to.
Yeah. Well, and the first thing is just having the self-discipline to stick to it. Make a plan and stick to it. Like I said, if you pay off some debts, it becomes easy because then you take the cash flow that was going toward the debt and now you put it into savings. But let's say you've been good with your debts and you've had the self-control there. Now what do you do? Well, I think it's as important as looking at your budget and saying, hey, where can I cut back? Where can I cut expenses? We've talked in previous shows, Sarah, about how every 2 years, I know in my household, I go through an austerity measure where every 2 years or so I say, okay, what can I cut out? What are the things I'm just not using anymore? Maybe they're memberships, subscriptions, whatever, and they could be a few dollars here and there, but it could add up to $200-$300 or even more.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, that's money that can then go into savings.
Yeah.
So it's really just getting focused. Also, in some cases, the 401k. Now, the Secure Act, Sarah, as you know, not just extended the age at which you take RMDs, but what it also did was make it mandatory now for 401k plans to be offered to part-timers, which traditionally you had to work more than 20 hours a week average to be part of that 401k plan. Now, as an employer, that's a headache for me, right? Because now we've got to do the accounting for any part-time people. We really don't have part-time people. I guess it doesn't apply, but if you do, it's a headache, and if you're matching, it could be more expense, right? Like we're matching dollar for dollar up to 6% in ours, right?
Yep,
So,
very generous match.
So if that were the case, and you have to do it with part-timers, it's a bigger expense.
Yeah.
But for the average investor, for our average listener, or yes, Sarah, thank you for clarifying, our average viewer, then it makes it a much better. It's good that they have access to that plan. So all in all, I'm glad that happened. I think it's a good thing.
Yep.
However, there might be times when you need to put less in your 401k so you can build up that emergency fund. Because remember, that 401k money, generally speaking, you can't touch it till you're 59 and a half without a penalty.
Yeah. So
especially if you're putting in more than the matching amount, you might want to reduce that a little bit so you can build up some emergency funds elsewhere. And in rare cases, even if let's say you're getting matched 25 cents on a dollar, that's a nice match, but it's not great. Maybe you even give up that match for a little bit to build up that emergency fund. Because think about how bad it is if we hit a recession, if somebody gets laid off, and then you end up with an inability to pay certain bills, and next thing you know, you get your credit marked up, or even worse, you lose a car or lose a home. That's worse than just losing out on a 25 or 50 cent on a dollar match in a 401k. So it's important, but the thing is you have to get focused on it and make it a priority. And the key with New Year's resolutions, I said one final thing here. I know you're chomping at the bit to get to our next Ask
we have a great
Dave.
question for you to answer, Dave. So I'll wrap it up, please.
Yeah, thank you for keeping me on track. The biggest thing with New Year's resolutions is don't have too many of them. If you have 3, guess what? You have 0. You can't focus on it. 1, maybe 2, max. Because any more than that, and it's going to be sensory overload. Pick the most important 1 or 2 and stay maniacally focused on it.
Well, let's get into our Ask Dave. We have Cliff from Illinois. He's asking, when do you think Congress will get around to fixing the Social Security program for future retirees, if ever? And I love this question. We get this question every few months, and I know our listeners, our viewers want to know the answer. So, Dave, it's time to get out your crystal ball and give us your best answer here.
Cliff, the day politicians stop being politicians will be the day that gets squared away in Congress. I was on a television interview, I know you saw it just a couple weeks ago, where I defined for the host the word politics. Do you remember that?
I do,
Yeah.
but tell us again, Dave,
it
for our
starts with the
listeners.
Greek word poly, which means many, and then ends with ticks, which is blood-sucking organisms. Okay, so that's what politics is all about. But Cliff, in all seriousness, we've been dealing with this for a long time, and we've got another decade or so before we literally will be in the red in the Social Security Trust Fund. So I can't tell you when, but we're sitting here right now and we can't get a House Majority Leader appointed when one particular party can't even agree. I can't imagine how we're going to get 2 parties to agree on anything. But Cliff, stay tuned, because I do want to talk more about Social Security in a minute and how that may very well be one of your New Year's resolutions if you're 55 or over.
And if you have a retirement question that you'd like Dave to answer, all you need to do is email us at askdave@theRetirementIncomeSource. That's SOURCE.com. And you might hear Dave answer your question on a future show. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels. I'm here with David Scranton. We're talking about the new year, making those New Year's resolutions, and really what some of your New Year's resolutions should be when it comes to personal finance, right? So we've talked about our RMDs, the Secure Act, bumping RMDs out, which is great. We've also talked about the Secure Act changes where part-time workers are now automatically enrolled, as well as other workers enrolled in the company's 401k. So it's a bit of a headache for business owners like Dave, but overall, it looks like the politicians, they managed to do something at least here with this Secure Act, right, Dave?
Something, yes, yes.
Something. So
But how about these, and Cliff was right. I mean, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is really, when are we going to fix Social Security? And,
Right.
and as I hinted toward, right now the estimates from the Social Security Administration say that the trust fund, the OASDI trust fund, is set to run out of principal in 2034. Now, that doesn't mean benefits end. It means that after that, they'll only be able to satisfy about 3/4 of the Social Security benefits due out of cash flow, out of FICA taxes that are currently being withheld. Because up till now, Sarah, it's been where there's been more money going in, more money working, and fewer people retire drawing on it. So the trust fund has been growing, and that's now reversing itself because people are living longer, and there's more people taking money out of it and doing it for a longer period of time than there are workers putting in the plan. So if they do nothing and sit on their hands, then 2034 comes and everyone's benefit will drop by 25%.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll happen. I think they have to get it fixed.
yeah. I think they will. I think they'll get it fixed, or I hope they will. Maybe I'm just being optimistic here. But since we can't control Congress, Dave, what can we control? Like, what can our listeners and our viewers do now to get ready for Social Security if they're
Sure.
50 to 55 years old?
Like I mentioned to Cliff, if you're right, I said 50 plus, but even if you're in your early 50s, Sarah, it might make sense to get started. If you're over 55, it definitely makes sense to get started planning on when you're going to take Social Security, because there's hundreds of different ways you could take Social Security, especially if you're married, because one spouse could take it at one point, another spouse could take it at another point. And frankly, by doing that, it stretches out. With all those options, it's easy to not maximize it. And sometimes the difference between the number one and number two best method of taking Social Security for an individual can be really $100,000 or more of cumulative benefits over the course of your lifetime. And, I don't know about you, Sarah, but an extra $100,000, that's a little bit of impetus to plan, is it not?
Oh, absolutely, Dave. I would not say no to an extra $100,000 and benefits over the lifetime.
Yeah.
So it's important, I think, that our listeners really take that to heart, because I hate to use the term free money, but in a sense, that's what Social Security is, because it's income that you can't outlive as long as Congress fixes the situation eventually.
And the thing is, you have to plan on when you want to take it, maximize it, when you want to retire, and then figure out how you're going to fill the gaps with money from other investments. In fact, Sarah, coming up, I want to focus on that. I want to focus more on your other investments. So let's say that our listeners or our viewers, as you clarified, have paid off their debts and they've built an emergency fund. Well, now what's the next step? Well, the next step is getting your investments ready to generate, you guessed it,
Income,
that's right. I'm David Scranton here at Sarah Samuels. This is the Retirement Income Source.
where it truly is all about the income.
And welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about the income. I'm David Scranton, of course, here with Sarah Samuels. And today, we've got a great show lined up as we're discussing the Secure Act 2.0, postponing the RMD age and allowing part-time workers to put money into 401k plans and the such. Most importantly, though, we're talking about those New Year's resolutions.
Yep.
Paying off debt, right? Getting the emergency fund built up. And now to focus more for our viewers, for our listeners, on really getting that savings and investment plan scored away for retirement.
Right. Well, Dave, real quick, let me interrupt you. For our radio listeners out there, you might have heard Dave mention viewers and listeners. So I just want to clarify that we are also on YouTube in addition to being on the radio.
Are you correcting me again?
I do have to correct you, Dave. I don't want to confuse our fans out
that
there.
are listening here, you might notice what's going on here. If you're not self-employed, you can be grateful, because it means if you're lucky, and you're married or in a permanent relationship, that means you have one lady who tells you what to do. But what you're starting to pick up on here is that if you own your own business, you have several ladies in your life telling you what to do. And here I have Sarah correcting me once again. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah.
Go ahead if you
Well,
must.
Dave, I
That's
just
all
want to
right.
make sure that our listeners are aware of our YouTube show. So if they want to go listen to past interviews you've done, even though you're being so mean to me right now, I think that your interviews you've done are great. And I want our listeners to be able to watch those videos and listen to some of those tips that you've given our past interviews.
Okay, so would you be happier? Would I make you happy, Sarah, if from now on I said our listeners and our YouTube viewers? Would that
Yes,
make you happy?
that would make me happy, Dave, because I
Good.
think everyone will understand.
Well, you know that makes me happy because I get up out of bed every morning and I say my goal today is to make the lovely Sarah Samuels happy today. So
Yeah.
if I can do that, then it's mission accomplished.
Well, it's a very tough goal, but good luck, Dave. So, Dave, tell us more now about these getting your savings and investments in line for retirement, why it's so important, and specifically what people need to do.
Well, because people listening to the retirement income source those are part of the income generation. I think we coined that phrase about a half dozen years ago.
Yeah.
And that means they're over the age of 50. It means you're at an age where you need to start thinking about retirement. You're on that final stretch. You're in the red zone, if you will. And now you have to score. If you're in the red zone and you don't score, you're going to lose the game. So now's the time to get really, really focused and to make sure your play calling is accurate, to use a football analogy. And making sure you're, number one, you're saving enough, hit your retirement goals based upon reasonable assumptions, and making sure your asset allocation is appropriate along the way too. And again, remember, your asset allocation changes as you get closer to your goal. It changes as your personal risk tolerance changes. So just because maybe a desired asset allocation, i.e. stock bond mix, was appropriate for you a couple years ago, doesn't mean it's necessarily appropriate for you today.
Yeah. Well, Dave, how do you know when is the right time to make this switch? And what is the philosophy that you really need to look into when you do make that switch?
Well, most important thing is you have to learn in this equation we always talk about on the show, right, Sarah? It's TR equals I plus G. Total return equals income plus growth. And up until this stage in your life, you've always been thinking about total return, right? I want to make 8% a year average return, just to throw out a number. You don't care if it comes from the I, the income, the interest and dividends, or whether it comes from growth or capital appreciation. You just want to make 8%. But when you're in retirement, the I takes priority over growth and over total return. Why? Because you need income, right? Retirement is all about
You've
the income.
retired, you're not getting that paycheck from work anymore, so how do you replace that income that you were receiving?
That's right. And when you get to a stage where you can generate enough income from your portfolio and just the reinvestment of that income, along with any additional savings, can get you to your goal, that's when you've got to make that transition from the G to the I. And if you planned right, it should be a full 10 years before retirement.
Yeah. Well, speaking of income, we have our Ask Dave question. We have Andrew from New York. He is saying, some say the only way to generate income is through annuities, but how else can you generate income in a portfolio?
Great. Well, great question. And Andrew, you know, annuities are fine, but they're like the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? There's some really good ones. There's some really bad ones. Annuities are sold. And as a result, you don't really know what you're getting, right? Unless you're an annuity expert or you're working with somebody who's a fiduciary, who's really has to have your best interests in mind. So annuities are not the be-all and end-all, although they are a tool. What are the other tools? Well, now we get into the universe of options that you're familiar with. Almost every option that you can think of has a G way, a growth way to own it, and an I way to own it. Stocks, right, Sarah? There are some stocks that are growth oriented, some stocks that pay a very high dividend, right? One of our own stock portfolios pays a 4.5% dividend yield, right?
Yeah.
And it actually made money in 2022 when the markets dropped, right?
Yep.
So
I believe it outperformed the markets in 2021 as well.
in a bull market, right?
Yeah.
In an upside and downside. And part of that's because it paid that 4+% dividend yield, right? But bonds, you can buy bonds that don't pay an interest payment, that are zero coupons, and those that do. So virtually everything that's out there can be done in a G way or an I way. The key is to change your investment philosophy from being total return focused and completely ignoring where that return comes from to now focusing on it and making the income a priority.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for sending us your question. And if anyone else out there has a question that you would like to hear answered on the show, or maybe you just want to send a nice note to Dave and tell him how great of a job he's doing on the show, right? All you need to do is email us at askdave@theretirementincomesource. That's SOURCE.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about your income. I'm Sarah Samuels, and I'm here with our host, David Scranton. We're talking all about New Year's resolutions that you should be making for your personal finances, plus the recent changes we saw to the Secure Act 2.0 and the recently passed spending bill. But Dave, let's talk more about income and how important it is. You mentioned something earlier about changing up your portfolio and looking into bonds. And I have to say, my own father, who's he's getting up there in age, he's nearing 70 years old. He is finally bought into the whole income thing, and he told me he recently purchased some bonds. He's concerned about recession and the stock market. So it actually makes me really happy, because even though, I'm not a financial advisor, I've been listening to you long enough to understand how important this is.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And I want to go back to the comment I made a minute ago. When should you start to make the transition? Yeah. Well, it's about the time when you have your lump sum of savings, and when you add to it whatever monies you're currently saving additionally. And then included on that is the reasonable interest or dividend rate, which today is maybe 5%. When all that together gets you to where you need to be, then you're good to go. So let me give you a quick example. Okay, so let's say right now, Sarah, you can make 5% interest and dividends, net of fees, which is a reasonable number. We do that for our clients every day. 5%. So okay, you're at that number. That means, let's say, again, using $1 million, and I know not all of our viewers and our listeners and YouTube viewers.
Perfect. There you go, Dave.
Sorry, Sarah. I hope I'm making you happy still.
You are doing a great job.
And between all that, you're generating $50,000 a year of income. Well, we don't know what that lump sum is going to be worth. We don't have a clue if you're retiring in 5 or 10 years, but we do know that right now generates $50,000 a year. And if you reinvest that 5% interest or dividend, next year your income will be 5% higher. It'll be $52,500, and the year after that it'll be $55,000. So we can make a simple calculation and add to that whatever you're currently saving, and figure out, hey, when are you going to have enough to have the income that you need in retirement just from the interest and dividends? And again, the target should be to be able to do that about 10 years before retirement. Why? Because now it doesn't matter what that lump sum is worth, right? Financial advisors love to talk, Sarah, about, oh, the market's going to go up, it's going to go down. Let's make an assumed rate of return over the next 10 years of 8%, let's say. But the reality is, none of us has a clue what we're going to earn in total return over the next several years. We have a good feel for what we're going to earn for interest and dividends, because they're pretty sticky, but we don't know about total return. Yeah. So why guess? When you get in that red zone, think about it. If you're in the red zone in football and you have a fullback that could pick up 3 to 5 yards of carry, you're going to let that fullback grab the ball and bring it in the end zone. You're not going to be putting the ball up in the air, unless, of course, maybe you have Tom Brady on your team. I don't know. But you're not going to be doing it, because
you have the all-star, the GOAT, right?
The safe approach. That's right. Grind it out 3 to 5 yards. And that's what income allows you to do once you get to that stage. So if you don't have really an idea as to, gee, how do I know when I'm there? How do I know when there's enough income so that between the savings and the income getting reinvested between now and retirement, I'll have enough to retire on? Well, then you want to find an income specialist, not a retirement specialist. They'll get you up to retirement, but they're not good at getting you through retirement. In fact, Sarah, coming up, I want to talk more about that. I want to talk more about what you need to do on that final stretch into retirement, and then what to do in the early stages of retirement.
Perfect. And Dave, I want to ask you, we have a great Ask Dave question all about inflation. It's been a little while, maybe a few shows since we've talked about inflation, but we're going to talk to you. We're going to ask Dave coming up right in just a few minutes.
I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and this is the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about the income.
Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about your income. I'm Sarah Samuels, and I'm here with David Scranton as we talk about New Year's resolutions, what New Year's resolutions you should be making for personal finance, plus some of those big changes that we saw in the recently passed spending bill for the Secure Act. So, Dave, we talked about building an emergency fund, right? That's important.
It is.
Paying off your high-interest credit card debt, taking care of that, making sure your Social Security is in order, so you're going to be maximizing your Social Social Security benefits. Plus, we talked about making sure your investment strategy is really aligned with your stage of life. So, Dave, I personally think that a lot of people, especially a lot of our listeners out there and our YouTube viewers, your resolution should be this year to find a financial advisor if you do not already have one.
Yeah, I find it is a New Year's resolution for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And some people may need help even when it comes to organizing how to get debts paid down or how to build up an emergency fund. But others can get that far on their own, but then they need help after that. And it's the hard part is nobody knows really where to look for a financial advisor.
Right. How do you find a financial advisor? Because, unfortunately, Dave, there are a lot of people out there in this industry that are not trustworthy. So how do you find someone that you can trust?
And you kind of want, people think word of mouth is good and referrals, and it's a good start, but is the person that's giving you the referral really knowledgeable in finance, and are they at the same stage of life that you are? You could be 60 years old. You can have a son who's 35, who's an actuary or an engineer, smartest guy in the world, but his advisor probably isn't appropriate for you because you're in a different stage of life.
Right. Your son's worried about growth, right? He wants to grow his money. He's young enough that if he can take a hit in the stock market, he's going to be okay versus if you're near retirement or in retirement.
And so that's part of it, making sure that the person giving you the referral is at the same stage you are. The other part of it is, are they knowledgeable, right? Are they just making a judgment based upon the fact the advisor provides good service, is very personable, seems to be a good listener? 90% plus of all financial advisors are men. And
which we need to change, I think, as a lady out here.
I do want to change it, and the reason is because men are not great listeners. Women are much better listeners when it comes to financial advisory, and that's an important quality. I'm always beating our advisors, the guys, over the head saying, listen, 2 ears, 1 mouth, stop talking and just listen to what everybody wants. But you can also take it too far. So you can have a referral from a friend, and they love the advisor because the person's a good listener. Well, just like with medicine, right? You can get a referral to a doctor, and maybe it's the person loves the doctor because they have a good bedside manner. But it's exactly what I went through now, or I'm going through now, I should say, with my shoulder problem, right? I go to one doctor, well, you absolutely need a replacement. And I go to another doctor, and they're saying, well, perhaps this other therapy can work. And I go to somebody else who says, well, stem cells can work, right? And I know they're controversial, but the point is, how do I know I'm not a doctor? So again, that's one of the toughest parts about finding an advisor is finding the right person. And I think maybe later on in the show we can give you a few interview questions, some good questions that might be helpful in finding the right person for you.
Yeah, I want you to share some tips with us, Dave, about the differences between an income specialist versus your run-of-the-mill financial advisor. But for right now, I want to get into our Ask Dave question. We have James from Iowa. The I word, Dave. He says, speaking of inflation, do you think the Fed will get it under control this year? And if not, do you think we'll have a recession? And I just got to say that all of our Ask Dave questions today from our viewers have been some crystal ball questions, right, Dave?
Yeah.
Like they're really asking you to predict the future here.
I was hoping we can get through an entire show without the I word or the R word, inflation or recession. But I guess it's a timely topic, so we have to touch upon it. But, I think that inflation is already getting better. It takes a while for the adjustments the Federal Reserve has made to really take effect. So even if they don't make any more interest rate increases, inflation is going to get better and better throughout the year. Now, we may not end the year with inflation, at 2%, but we can very well end the year with inflation in the 3s or maybe even at 2 when you look at that monthly year-over-year rate. And I don't want to get off on that tangent again.
So we can't get started on that, Dave. We don't have enough time left in our show.
Every other show I do, that's right. So I think that will get, based on what's happened already, be under control. And as far as a recession is concerned, it's possible that they've already tightened enough to create a recession, or future tightening will create a recession or ensure a recession. But I also think that it's likely to be mild. It's not likely to be that severe. So, hopefully, fingers crossed, 2023, first half will continue with the volatility, and then second half we can see things stable out again toward the end of the year.
Yep. And for all of our listeners and our YouTube viewers out there, send us your retirement questions so Dave can answer them. Any of your burning questions you might have, anything you really want to know. Dave was just talking about where to go to get good advice, right? So send Dave your questions at askdave@theretirementincome.source, SOURCE.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it truly is all about your income. I'm Sarah Samuels. I'm here with Dave Scranton. We're wrapping up our show today, all about New Year's resolutions that we think you should really try to keep, especially paying down your debt, building up your emergency fund, taking care of Social Security, looking at your investment strategy. So there are a lot of different things you need to do to make sure you're good in retirement. But Dave, let's get back to what we talked about. It was a couple minutes ago about the difference between an income specialist and a financial advisor, because I think it's really important for our listeners and YouTube viewers to understand the difference.
Yeah, and a lot of people do it themselves their entire lives because they're a good primary coach of their own money, right? They know how to play offense, they can build over time, but as they get close to retirement, they've got to make a transition, and some don't realize it and others realize it, and they don't know what to do, even if they do realize it.
Yeah.
And the most important time in a football game for coaching is when you're in that red zone. So I would encourage almost everybody listening today that if they're part of the income generation, or if they're within 10 years or so of retirement, now is the time to start to look for an advisor. It should be a New Year's resolution, but not a retirement planner, but truly an income specialist. So Sarah, I'd like to give everybody maybe some good interview questions they can use.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to wrap up today's show, Dave.
Yeah. So here's some examples. Okay. Overall, if you're going to interview an advisor, you don't remember advisors are salespeople, right? Because they want to get business. A good doctor is a good salesperson, right? They're gonna downplay the amount of pain and suffering I'm gonna go through once I get my shoulder replacement, right? If they build it up, I'm not gonna get it done. They're not gonna get the business. A good lawyer is also a good salesperson. So financial advisors are no different. So if you go in there and show your cards too much in terms of what you want or what you're thinking, maybe you listen to the show, you've learned a lot, and now you come in feeding information to the person is likely to say, well, that's what we do, that's what we do, that's what we specialize in, and sell you on it. So try not to show your hand, right? I'd like to ask a few questions. First of all, something like this. Gee, I'm going to retire in 8 years. Give me an idea as to what you think a reasonable stock bond allocation should be. And pause. If the answer is more than 50% in stocks, I would get a little nervous at that point because you're really close to retirement and you might be carrying too much risk for too long. Then I'd ask another question. If you're buying bonds, do you buy bonds or do you buy bond funds or bond ETFs? If they said they're buying individual bonds, maybe that's a good sign. If they're saying bond funds or bond ETFs, maybe that's a bad sign. More generally speaking, how do you generate income? If they talk about an income plan where they're going to take systematic withdrawals, or maybe they're going to have buckets of money where, they spend down one bucket in the early years and then they go to bucket number 2 or bucket number 3. Well, then that's not truly generating income. It's not truly generating interest and dividends. It's spending down principal and crossing your fingers and toes and hoping that it's going to grow back, okay? So again, another great question. Maybe the last question is, what do you think of annuities? And just hear what they have to say. If somebody's totally against annuities, I might run. If they're totally for annuities, I might run. Again, the truth lies in the middle somewhere. So hopefully, Sarah, that helps with 4 good interview questions for those that are members of the income generation.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great advice as usual, Dave. Those are great questions. I think a lot of people that aren't in the industry, that aren't income specialists, might not know to ask these important questions to get those important answers. So if you missed part of today's show and you want to catch up, or maybe you want to send this link to your friend, all you need to do is go to the retirementincomesourceradio.com and you can listen to all of our past shows there.
And of course, yes, we would love it if you shared this show and our past episodes with your friends and family. Thanks again for spending some time here with us today. I'm David Scranton, here with Sarah Samuels. Join us once again next week, right here on the Retirement Income Source, where, yes, it truly is all about the income.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.